The gardens of the Celestian Embassy gleamed with an otherworldly beauty, plants from a dozen worlds coexisting in carefully maintained harmony. Nico Trevino moved among them with practiced ease, his calloused hands gently pruning an Arcturian mist vine that had begun encroaching on its neighbors. At 32, he was the youngest human botanist ever assigned to the diplomatic outpost on Celestia, the jewel of the Xiron system. "What are you doing to that plant?" a small voice asked in halting English. Nico turned to find a Celestian child watching him from behind a luminescent bush. Her skin was a deep purple with subtle iridescent patterns that caught the artificial light, and her eyes, large and curious, were the color of earth amethysts. She couldn't have been more than 8 by human standards. "I'm helping it," Nico explained, gesturing with his pruning shears. "Sometimes plants need guidance to grow properly." The child stepped forward, her movements fluid in the lighter gravity that humans like Nico had to adjust to. "Plants on your world need cutting to grow? How strange." Nico smiled, setting down his tools and kneeling to meet her eye level. "And what's your name? Should you be in the diplomatic gardens alone?" "I am Thalera," she replied with the characteristic formality of Celestian children. "My father is Senior Emissary Vorin. He's meeting with your ambassador." She pointed toward the crystalline structure that housed the human delegation. "I'm allowed to explore the safe areas." "Well, Thalera, it's nice to meet you. I'm Nico." "You're different from the other humans," she observed, circling him with unabashed curiosity. "They wear uniforms and speak loudly. You wear simple clothes and speak to plants." Nico laughed. "That's because I'm a gardener, not a diplomat. I work with living things rather than words and policies." Thalera's eyes widened. "A garden tender, like our cultivators." There was newfound respect in her voice. Among Celestians, those who tended the sacred gardens held positions of honor. "Something like that," Nico agreed, though he knew his position was far less prestigious among humans than cultivators were in Celestian society. "Will you show me how you speak to plants?" Thalera asked, moving closer, her natural bioluminescence creating a soft glow in the shadows of the garden. Nico should have returned to his work. The garden required constant attention, but something about the child's earnest interest touched him. "I'd be happy to." For the next hour, Nico guided Thalera through the embassy gardens, explaining earth botany in terms she could understand. She proved to be an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions about pollination cycles and growth patterns. When he showed her how to gently support a struggling Terran orchid with a specially designed trellis, her face lit up with delight. "On Celestia, plants and people have a sacred bond," she explained as she mimicked his careful movements. "The ancestral texts say we were born from the same stellar dust." "That's not so different from Earth beliefs," Nico replied. "Many of our cultures see a deep connection between people and the natural world." He paused, struck by how easily they communicated despite their differences. "You speak excellent English for someone so young." Thalera straightened proudly. "Father says understanding other species is the highest form of respect. I practice with the language modules every day." She tilted her head, her bioluminescent patterns shifting subtly, a sign of deep thought among Celestians. "Will you be staying on Celestia long?" Nico shook his head. "Just another week, then I return to Earth for new assignments." Disappointment flickered across her features. "That's unfortunate. I've learned more about xenobotany from you than from 6 cycles of educational immersion." "Perhaps you'll become a xenobotanist yourself someday," Nico suggested, touched by her interest. "Perhaps," she agreed solemnly. Then, with the directness unique to children, she added, "You would make a good life partner for a Celestian." Nico nearly dropped his watering can, caught off guard by the comment. "That's very kind, but humans and Celestians have many differences." "Differences create strength," Thalera countered, quoting what was clearly a Celestian proverb. "Father says the strongest gardens contain diverse species." "Your father sounds wise," Nico replied diplomatically. "When I complete my growth cycle, I will need a life partner who understands the bond between worlds," Thalera continued, her young face suddenly serious. "Someone like you." Nico bit back a smile, charmed by her solemn declaration. Children were the same across the galaxy, full of grand plans and absolute certainty. "Well," he said gently, "when you grow up, if you still want a human botanist for a life partner, I'd be honored." Thalera's bioluminescent patterns pulsed brightly, the Celestian equivalent of a wide smile. "That is a promise, Nico Gardner." "Sure," he agreed with a light laugh, playing along with what he took as a child's momentary fancy. "When you're all grown up, if you still want to marry a human botanist, I promise I'll marry you." Thalara placed her small hand over her chest, a formal gesture among her people. "Then it is bound by the stars. I will remember." Before Nico could respond, a melodic chime sounded across the garden, the Celestian equivalent of an announcement system. Thalara glanced toward the embassy building. "Father is calling, I must go." She gave him a formal bow, far too dignified for her young age. "Until we meet again, Nico Gardner, I will remember your promise." She darted away, a small purple figure quickly lost among the exotic foliage. Nico shook his head, smiling at the encounter as he returned to his work. Children's imaginations were wonderful things. By tomorrow, she'd likely have forgotten all about him in favor of some new fascination. How wrong he was. The remaining days on Celestia passed quickly. Nico occasionally spotted Thalara observing him from a distance, but his duties kept him too busy for more lengthy interactions. On his final day, as he packed his botanical samples for the journey home, a small package appeared among his belongings. Inside was a crystalline seed pod native to Celestia but unknown to Earth science, a priceless gift. The accompanying note, written in careful English, read simply, "For your garden on Earth, so you remember your promise. Thalara." Nico carefully secured the precious seed, touched by the gesture but confident that the child would soon forget her fanciful notion of marrying a human botanist. He departed Celestia the next morning, his thoughts already turning to his next assignment. The diplomatic mission had been deemed a success, establishing the first formal relations between Earth and the technologically advanced Celestians. As the transport ship pulled away from the jewel-like planet, Nico had no way of knowing that his casual promise would echo across the years to come. 10 years passed in a blur of assignments and achievements. After his groundbreaking work on Celestia, Nico's career had accelerated. At 42, he had become one of the Interstellar Botanical Authority's most respected xenobotanists, renowned for his ability to adapt alien flora for human environments. His current posting was the pride of the human space program, the Harmony Gardens aboard Nexus Station, a massive research hub orbiting the gas giant Olympia. The station served as neutral ground for a dozen alien species, and the gardens were both a scientific laboratory and a diplomatic space where different species could interact in comfortable surroundings. Nico stood in his favorite section, a recreation of a Jovian forest where bioluminescent trees stretched toward the artificial sunlight. His hands were deep in the soil, feeling for the subtle vibrations that would tell him if the root systems were healthy. "Head botanist Trevino," his assistant's voice came through his earpiece. "There's a visitor for you at the garden entrance, a Celestian dignitary." Nico frowned. There were no scheduled Celestian delegations this cycle. Did they give a name? "Yes, sir. She identified herself as Lady Thalara, daughter of emissary Vorin. She says you're expecting her." Nico froze, a decade-old memory suddenly rushing back. Surely it couldn't be. "Sir, should I tell her you're occupied?" "No," Nico replied, brushing soil from his hands. "I'll meet her." As he walked toward the garden entrance, Nico told himself this was merely a diplomatic courtesy. Perhaps the young girl he'd met had grown up to follow her father into diplomacy and was making a formal visit. The moment he stepped through the garden archway, Nico knew this was no routine diplomatic call. Standing by the reflecting pool was a Celestian woman whose presence commanded the space around her. Her skin was the same deep purple he remembered, but now it carried intricate patterns that shimmered with each movement. Her silver-white hair was arranged in elaborate braids interwoven with living flowers. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to capture and reflect the ambient light. But it was her eyes that stopped him in his tracks, the same vibrant amethyst eyes that had watched him with childish curiosity a decade ago, now filled with adult purpose and determination. "Nico Gardner," she said, her voice musical but confident. "I have returned to claim the promise made under the stars." Around them, various station personnel tried to pretend they weren't staring at the stunning Celestian woman who had just arrived with an entourage of advisors and what appeared to be ceremonial guards. "Thalara," Nico managed, hardly believing the transformation. "You've grown up." A smile curved her lips. Yes, and I have spent 10 years preparing for this day. She stepped closer, her movement graceful in the station's artificial gravity. I have come for you, Nico Trevino. As you promised, you will be my life partner. And in that moment, Nico realized that what he had dismissed as a child's fancy had been taken as a solemn vow, one that had shaped the course of a young Celestian's life. A promise made in kindness had returned in a way he could never have imagined, bringing with it complications that would change his life forever. Nico stared at Thalara, momentarily speechless. The diplomatic staff around them had fallen into a hushed silence, sensing the significance of the encounter. The Celestian guards, their blue skin a shade lighter than Thalara's deep purple, stood at formal attention, their presence making it clear this was no casual visit. Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private, Nico finally suggested, acutely aware of the growing audience. Thalara nodded regally. That would be appropriate. The details of our union deserve proper attention. Union, the word hung in the air between them. Nico led her through the hydroponics section and into his private laboratory, a peaceful space filled with specimens from dozens of worlds. Once the door closed behind them, he turned to face her directly. Thalara, you must understand what I said when you were a child. It wasn't meant as a formal commitment. She tilted her head, the luminescent patterns on her skin pulsing gently, a sign of contemplation among her people. You promised to marry me when I grew up. I am grown now. On Earth, adults often make playful promises to children. It's a form of affection not meant to be taken literally. Are you suggesting humans make false promises to their young? Thalara asked, genuine confusion in her eyes. Nico ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Not false exactly, more symbolic. Symbols have power, Nico Gardener. She moved closer, studying him with those piercing amethyst eyes. The seed pod I gave you, did it grow? The question caught him off guard. Yes, actually, it thrived in my personal greenhouse on Earth. How did you know? Because it was bound to your promise. Her voice softened. Among my people, words create reality. The seed grew because your promise, whether you recognized it or not, was genuine. Nico sighed. This was venturing into cultural territory he hadn't anticipated. Thalara, even if I made a promise, surely you don't actually want to marry someone you met once as a child. I have known you far longer than you realize, she replied. After you left Celestia, I followed your career with great interest. Your revolutionary work integrating Celestian biotechnology with Earth agriculture. Your papers on harmonic resonance in cross-species pollination. Your development of sustainable biospheres for long-term space travel. Nico blinked in surprise. She'd been tracking his professional achievements for years. I even studied under Professor Joshi at the Interplanetary Botanical Institute when she collaborated with you 3 years ago, Thalara continued. You wouldn't remember me. I observed remotely, and Celestians at early maturation stages look similar to human eyes. You became a botanist because of me. Thalara's bioluminescence flared briefly, the equivalent of a blush. I discovered my own passion for the botanical sciences, but yes, you were the catalyst. As I matured, I realized my childhood intuition was correct. You are indeed ideally suited as my life partner. Before Nico could respond, his communication device chimed urgently. He glanced at the screen and groaned. The station director is requesting our immediate presence. It seems your arrival has caused quite a stir. As expected, Thalara said with a slight smile. My father is now the High Envoy of Celestia. My choice of life partner has certain diplomatic implications. Nico's eyes widened. Diplomatic implications? Thalara, what exactly does your father think is happening here? That his daughter has chosen a respected xenobotanist as her consort, as is her right upon reaching full maturation. She adjusted one of the living flowers in her hair with practiced precision. The Celestian Council will be expecting formal acknowledgement of our union within the stellar cycle. The Council knows about this. Of course, a union between a High Envoy's daughter and Earth's preeminent xenobotanist is a matter of significant diplomatic interest. She reached out, touching his arm gently. But that is not why I chose you, Nico. I chose you because the promise we made has grown in my heart like the seed I gave you, steadily, surely, reaching for light. The poetry of her words caught him off guard, as did the warmth of her touch. There was something disarmingly sincere about her, despite the absurdity of the situation. We should not keep Director Jensen waiting, Thalara said, moving toward the door with fluid grace. Nico followed, his mind racing. Somehow, a casual interaction with a child had blossomed into an interstellar diplomatic incident, and somewhere beneath his panic, he couldn't help but be impressed by the woman Thalara had become. Director Freya Jensen was renowned for her unflappable demeanor in diplomatic crises, but even she seemed taken aback by the situation unfolding in her office. Seated across from her were Nico, Thalara, and Ambassador Jalil, Earth's senior diplomat on Nexus Station. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," Jensen said, her fingers steepled. "Lady Thalara, you are claiming that head botanist Trevino made a formal proposal of marriage to you 10 years ago, and you've now arrived to accept this proposal." "That is correct," Thalara confirmed serenely. "And this proposal was made when you were a child." "Yes, it is not uncommon in our culture for future unions to be recognized early, though consummation awaits full maturation." Ambassador Jalil cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Director, I've consulted with our cultural liaison. In Celestian society, promises are considered binding spiritual contracts, especially those made to children, who are seen as closer to the cosmic consciousness." "I understand cultural differences, Ambassador," Jensen replied, "but surely there must be protocols for misunderstandings of this nature." "There are," Thalara interjected smoothly. "If Nico Gardner formally declares that his promise was empty words, what we call void speaking, I would be honor-bound to withdraw my claim." All eyes turned to Nico. The diplomatic implication was clear. Rejecting Thalara's claim would essentially be admitting that humans made meaningless promises to Celestian children. "However," Thalara continued, "such a declaration would be noted in the Celestian archives as the first instance of void speaking in our diplomatic relations with Earth." Nico winced. The first major cultural offense in human-Celestian relations would bear his name. "There is another option," Ambassador Jalil suggested carefully. "The traditional courtship period." Thalara's bioluminescent patterns brightened with approval. "Yes, that would be appropriate. A formal courtship would allow Nico to honor his promise while providing time to determine genuine compatibility." "Courtship period?" Nico asked. "A 3-cycle duration," Thalara explained, "during which we would participate in traditional compatibility rituals and spend time learning about one another. At the conclusion, either party may withdraw without dishonor if true incompatibility is discovered." Director Jensen leaned forward. "That sounds reasonable, botanist Trevino." Nico felt trapped. Rejecting outright would cause a diplomatic incident, but agreeing meant committing to an elaborate courtship ritual with a woman he barely knew. Yet as he looked at Thalara, her expression hopeful yet dignified, he found himself considering the possibility. "How long is a Celestian cycle?" he asked, stalling for time. "Approximately 40 Earth days," Ambassador Jalil provided. 4 months of courtship, then he could gracefully exit without causing interstellar offense. It seemed the least problematic solution. "I would be honored to participate in a traditional courtship," Nico said finally. The tension in the room visibly dissipated. Thalara's skin glowed with pleasure, the patterns shifting into what Nico recognized as expressions of joy. "Excellent," Director Jensen said, looking relieved. "Ambassador Jalil will coordinate with Lady Thalara's entourage regarding the necessary arrangements." As they prepared to leave, Thalara stepped close to Nico. "The first ritual is the confluence of paths," she said softly. "It will take place tomorrow at the rising of Olympia's rings. Traditional attire will be provided for you." Before he could respond, she reached out and gently touched his face, a surprisingly intimate gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Until tomorrow, Nico Gardner," she whispered, then turned and departed with her entourage, leaving Nico standing bewildered in her wake. Later that evening, Nico paced his quarters, still processing the day's events. His communication terminal chimed, and the face of his longtime friend and colleague, botanical engineer Petra Okafor, appeared on screen. "Tell me the rumors aren't true," she said without preamble, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You're engaged to the daughter of Celestia's High Envoy." Nico groaned. "News travels fast." "Are you kidding? It's all anyone on the botanical network is talking about. How did this happen?" He explained the situation. The chance encounter a decade ago, the misunderstood promise, and the diplomatic compromise of the courtship period. "Let me get this straight," Petra said when he finished. "A gorgeous alien botanist who happens to be botanical royalty among her people has been following your career for years and has now traveled across the galaxy to claim you as her life partner. And you're treating this like a problem." "It's complicated, Petra." "Oh, I'm sure it is," she replied with a knowing smirk. "Especially with those striking purple Celestians. I've heard they have bioluminescent patterns that change with their emotions, must make poker difficult." "This isn't funny," Nico muttered, though he found himself fighting a smile. "Have you considered the scientific opportunities? A formal connection to Celestia's botanical hierarchy could advance xenobotanical research by decades. Their living architecture technology alone." "I'm not going to marry someone for research access." "Of course not," Petra agreed too quickly. "But since you're stuck in this courtship anyway, you might as well keep an open mind." Her expression softened. "Seriously, Nico, when was the last time you connected with someone since Eleni left?" "Don't," he cut her off. His divorce 5 years ago was still a tender subject. "All I'm saying is, maybe the universe works in strange ways. This Thalara sought you out across the stars. That's pretty romantic when you think about it." After ending the call, Nico found himself at the viewport, gazing out at the gas giant Olympia with its magnificent ring system. Somewhere on the station, Thalara was preparing for tomorrow's ritual, confident in a future he couldn't even imagine. A chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, a Celestian attendant stood there, holding an ornate box. "Lady Thalara sends this with her regards," the blue-skinned attendant said formally, "for tomorrow's confluence." Nico accepted the box with appropriate thanks. Once alone, he opened it to find an exquisite garment, a tunic made from what appeared to be living fabric, shimmering with subtle patterns reminiscent of Celestian bioluminescence. Beneath it lay a small crystal vial containing a glowing amber liquid and a note in Thalara's elegant handwriting. "Apply 3 drops to your wrists before the ceremony. It will help you perceive the path harmonics. Dream well, my chosen one." Nico set the vial carefully on his nightstand, a mixture of trepidation, and he was surprised to realize curiosity stirring within him. Tomorrow he would begin a journey he never expected, with a woman who had crossed the stars to find him. What had he gotten himself into? The Confluence of Paths ceremony took place in the Nexus Station's central atrium, transformed for the occasion into a garden of bioluminescent Celestian flora. The station's artificial gravity had been adjusted to match Celestia's lighter pull, giving the proceedings an ethereal quality as humans and aliens alike seemed to float more than walk. Nico stood at the center of an intricate pattern formed by living light-emitting plants, wearing the remarkable living fabric tunic Thalara had sent. The material responded to his body heat, subtly shifting in color and texture. As instructed, he had applied 3 drops of the amber liquid to his wrists, and now the world around him seemed enhanced, colors more vibrant, sounds more textured. The assembled diplomatic corps and station personnel watched with rapt attention as Thalara entered the atrium. She wore a gown that seemed composed of living light, her purple skin radiant against the flowing silver fabric. Living flowers adorned her hair, their bioluminescence pulsing in rhythm with her movements. When she reached Nico, she extended her palms upward, the traditional Celestian greeting between equals. "You honor me with your presence, Nico Gardener," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. "The honor is mine," Nico replied, placing his palms over hers as he'd been instructed by Ambassador Jalil's cultural team. The moment their hands touched, something extraordinary happened. The amber liquid on his wrist seemed to activate, creating a visible current of golden light that flowed between their joined hands. Gasps arose from the observers. "The paths recognize each other," announced an elderly Celestian with striking indigo skin. Sage Vornax, Thalara had explained earlier, a spiritual leader who had traveled with her entourage specifically for this ceremony. Sage Vornax approached, carrying what appeared to be a crystal bowl filled with clear liquid. "In the confluence, we seek not union but understanding. 2 separate beings, 2 separate journeys, acknowledging the intersection of their paths." He placed the bowl between them, and Thalara gently guided Nico's hands to join hers beneath the surface of the liquid. Immediately, the water began to glow, threads of light dancing outward from their submerged fingers. "Speak your true intention for this courtship," Sage Vornax instructed Nico. Nico had rehearsed diplomatic platitudes, but something about the ceremony, perhaps the mysterious amber liquid, compelled honesty. "I seek to understand Thalara and her culture with an open heart and mind, to honor the promise I made, and to discover if there exists between us a connection worthy of the journey she has undertaken." The liquid in the bowl pulsed with light, forming complex patterns that swirled around their joined hands. Thalara's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by his sincerity. When her turn came, she spoke with equal candor. "I seek to show Nico that what began as a child's recognition of kindred spirit has matured into a woman's desire for true partnership, that across the stars and species, we share a harmony that cannot be denied." The patterns in the bowl intensified, becoming so bright that Nico had to squint. The assembled crowd murmured in appreciation. "The confluence is strong," Sage Vornax declared, satisfaction evident in his voice. "The courtship period begins now and will continue for 3 cycles. May your paths illuminate each other." As the formal ceremony concluded and the gathering transitioned to a diplomatic reception, Nico found himself actually enjoying Thalara's company. The amber liquid had worn off, but a lingering clarity remained. He saw her now not as an alien or a diplomatic complication, but as a person, brilliant, determined, and unexpectedly genuine. "Your words during the confluence," she said quietly as they stood together observing the mingling guests. "They were not rehearsed." "No," he admitted, "something about that liquid you sent me." A smile played at her lips. "Path essence doesn't create feelings, Nico. It merely reveals what already exists beneath our conscious thoughts." Before he could process the implications of this, they were approached by senior botanist Jasper Wung, Nico's colleague and occasional rival. "Fascinating ceremony," Wung said, his eyes darting between them with barely concealed curiosity. "Lady Thalara, I've studied your paper on symbiotic root systems in low-gravity environments. Brilliant work." "You're kind to say so," Thalara replied graciously. "Though I believe your critique in the Xenobotanical Journal suggested my conclusions were premature at best." Wung had the grace to look embarrassed. "Scientific discourse requires healthy skepticism." "Indeed," Thalara agreed. "Perhaps you'd be interested in the living samples I've brought from Celestia's deep-root caverns. They may address some of your skepticism." The subtle challenge in her voice made Nico hide a smile. Clearly, Thalara was no pushover in academic circles. "I would be most interested," Wung replied, clearly recognizing the professional opportunity despite his reservations. As Wung moved on, Nico turned to Thalara with newfound respect. "You handled that diplomatically." "I can be diplomatic when necessary," she said, her bioluminescent patterns shifting in what Nico was beginning to recognize as amusement. "But in matters of botanical science, I prefer empirical evidence to speak for itself." Their conversation was interrupted by Director Jensen, who approached with a tall, elegant Celestian male with royal blue skin. "Head botanist Trevino, may I present High Envoy Vorin of Celestia," Jensen said formally. Nico straightened immediately. This was Thalara's father, the most senior Celestian diplomat in the galaxy. "High Envoy, it's an honor," Nico said, offering the traditional palm-up greeting. Vorin studied Nico with penetrating eyes the same shade of amethyst as his daughter's. "The honor is shared, botanist Trevino. I have followed your work with great interest, particularly your cultivation of our sacred Lumina plant in Earth gravity." "Father," Thalara acknowledged with a formal nod that nonetheless contained obvious affection. "Daughter," Vorin replied warmly. "The confluence was most promising. Your mother would have been pleased." A shadow crossed Thalara's luminescent patterns. Grief, Nico realized. Yes, she would have appreciated the symmetry. Vorin turned back to Nico. "My daughter has chosen her path with characteristic determination. The courtship period will reveal if that path is truly meant to intertwine with yours." Though spoken diplomatically, there was an unmistakable protective note in his voice. "I respect her choice and the traditions of your people," Nico replied carefully. "Respect is a beginning," Vorin conceded. "Understanding is the journey." After the High Envoy moved on to speak with other dignitaries, Thalara touched Nico's arm lightly. "He approved of you in his way." "That was approval," Nico asked, only half joking. Thalara's patterns rippled with subtle laughter. By Celestian standards, absolutely. When I informed him of my intentions 10 years ago, he was considerably more reserved. 10 years, wait, you told your father about this when you were a child. Of course, on the very day we met. He thought it was a passing fancy, but he respected my conviction enough to investigate your background even then. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Why do you think your application for extended xenobotanical studies was approved so readily? Nico stared at her in astonishment. Are you saying your father influenced my career path? Not exactly. He merely ensured opportunities would be available if you proved worthy of them. She tilted her head. Your achievements are entirely your own, Nico Gardner. My father merely removed potential obstacles. Nico wasn't sure whether to be grateful or disturbed by this revelation. Before he could decide, Thalara continued. The second courtship ritual takes place in 3 days, the sharing of domains. You will show me your world and I will show you mine. My world is over 30 light-years away, Nico pointed out. Thalara smiled enigmatically. Distance is relative when paths converge. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. News of the courtship between Earth's preeminent xenobotanist and the daughter of Celestia's high envoy had spread throughout the scientific community. Nico received countless messages from colleagues, ranging from congratulatory to concerned to openly envious. 3 days after the confluence, Nico stood in his botanical laboratory, making final preparations for the sharing of domains ritual. According to the information provided by Thalara's cultural attaché, this ceremony involved each participant showcasing elements of their life that held deep personal meaning. For Nico, the choice was obvious. The laboratory was his domain, specifically the special section he had created to house specimens from dozens of worlds, including the now thriving plant grown from the seed pod Thalara had given him as a child. He was adjusting the environmental controls when Thalara arrived, accompanied only by Sage Vornax. She wore simpler attire today, a practical bodysuit of shifting blue-purple fabric that reminded Nico of Earth's oceanic bioluminescent algae. "Welcome to my domain," Nico said, the formal greeting feeling less awkward than he had expected. Thalara's eyes lit up as she took in the laboratory. "Your organization principle, it's harmonic resonance, isn't it? You've arranged the plants according to their bioenergetic frequencies." Nico nodded, impressed by her immediate understanding. Most botanists organize by taxonomic classification or world of origin. But you recognize that plants from different worlds can share underlying patterns, she said, moving through the space with evident delight. This is exactly what I proposed in my thesis on transgalactic botanical harmonies. I read your thesis, Nico admitted. It influenced my approach here. Her luminescent patterns brightened with pleasure. You've read my work. After our meeting in the director's office, I researched your publications. Your insights on vibrational communication between non-related plant species are compelling. For the next hour, Nico guided Thalara through his laboratory, explaining his research and the special adaptations he had developed for each species. She asked insightful questions and offered observations that sometimes challenged his thinking in productive ways. When they reached the centerpiece of his collection, the mature plant from her childhood seed, Thalara fell silent, her patterns shifting to a deep indigo that Nico couldn't interpret. "You've cultivated it perfectly," she finally said, her voice soft with emotion. "It's rare for Celestian heartmind plants to thrive off-world." "Heartmind plant," Nico echoed. "My analysis identified it as a decorative succulent." "It is much more than that," Sage Vornax interjected, speaking for the first time since the ritual began. "The heartmind is sacred to our people. It grows only when nurtured by one who possesses genuine spiritual harmony." Thalara touched the plant's iridescent leaves gently. "Among our people, these are traditionally exchanged only between those considering life partnership. I was too young to understand the full significance when I gave it to you." Nico looked at the plant with new eyes. "It's been the cornerstone of my research into adaptive botanical telepathy. It seems to form symbiotic relationships with other species at unprecedented rates." "Because it responds to intention and emotional resonance," Thalara explained. "My giving it to you created the first bond. Your care for it, even without understanding its nature, strengthened that connection. The implication hung in the air between them, that their connection had literally been growing for a decade, manifested in this living organism. "It is time," Sage Vornax announced, "for Lady Thalara to share her domain." Thalara nodded and withdrew a small device from a pouch at her waist. When activated, it projected a three-dimensional hologram that filled the center of the laboratory, a perfect recreation of an alien garden unlike anything Nico had ever seen. "My personal cultivation space on Celestia," Thalara explained. "Step inside." Hesitantly, Nico moved into the hologram. To his amazement, it responded to his presence, the projected plants moving as if in a gentle breeze as he passed. The detail was extraordinary. He could almost smell the exotic blooms. "This is remarkable technology," he said, reaching out to touch a holographic flower that seemed to react to his proximity. "More than technology," Thalara replied, joining him within the projection. "The garden is real, existing now on Celestia. What you're experiencing is a quantum resonance projection, a direct link to my actual domain." She guided him through the virtual garden, showing him plants he'd only read about in xenobotanical journals. Some were beautiful, others strange, all fascinating. But what captivated him most was Thalara herself, the way she spoke about each specimen with intimate knowledge and obvious affection. "And this," she said, leading him to the center of the garden where a small earth plant grew in a specially designed habitat, "is the first Terran species I ever cultivated, a cutting from the orchid you were tending when we met." Nico stared in disbelief. "You kept it all these years." "It reminded me of you," she said simply, "of the human who spoke to plants and promised to marry me someday." Something shifted in Nico's perception. What had begun as an awkward diplomatic obligation suddenly felt different, more personal, more significant. Sage Vornax stepped forward, observing them both with keen eyes. "The sharing of domains is complete. The resonance is strong between you." As the hologram faded, Thalara turned to Nico. "The third ritual, the harmony of purpose, takes place in 7 days. Until then, we are encouraged to spend time learning about each other outside of formal ceremonies." "I would like that," Nico found himself saying, and was surprised to realize he meant it. After Thalara and Sage Vornax departed, Nico remained in his laboratory, contemplating the heart-mind plant. He had cared for it for a decade without understanding its significance, just as he had carried Thalara's memory without recognizing its importance. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to this courtship than diplomatic obligation after all. Over the following days, Nico and Thalara spent increasing amounts of time together. They collaborated on a research project combining her expertise in quantum botanical communication with his work on adaptive cross-species grafting. They shared meals, introducing each other to their native cuisines. They walked through the station's recreational areas, drawing curious but increasingly accepting glances from the other residents. Nico learned that Thalara had lost her mother to a rare condition when she was 14, that she played a Celestian musical instrument similar to Earth's theremin, and that despite her formal diplomatic demeanor, she had a quick wit and adventurous spirit. Thalara discovered Nico's passion for ancient Earth poetry, his fondness for spicy food, which she could not tolerate, and the real reason behind his divorce, his ex-wife's frustration with his dedication to work that took him across the galaxy for months at a time. "She said I was married to my plants," Nico explained one evening as they sat in the station's observation dome, watching Olympia's rings catch the light of the distant sun. "Maybe she was right." "Perhaps you simply hadn't found someone who shared your passion," Thalara suggested, her luminescent patterns shifting in the gentle pattern he now recognized as thoughtfulness. "Is that why you never formed a life partnership on Celestia?" Nico asked. "Too busy with botanical research." Thalara's patterns darkened briefly. "There were opportunities. My father's position made me a desirable match politically, but I had made a promise to a human gardener." The teasing light returned to her eyes. "And Celestians keep their promises, even when they're made based on a child's impression." "Especially then," she replied seriously. "Children see with clarity that adults often lose. I saw something in you that day, a kindness, a connection to living things that resonated with my spirit. Was I wrong?" Nico considered deflecting with humor but found himself answering honestly. "No, You weren't wrong." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the cosmic display outside. Finally, Nico voiced the question that had been growing in his mind. "When the courtship period ends, what happens if compatibility is confirmed?" Thalara turned to him, her expression both hopeful and cautious. "If both parties agree, a formal union ceremony would take place. Traditionally, the couple would establish a shared domain, combining elements of both worlds." "And what would that mean practically? Would you expect me to live on Celestia?" "Not necessarily. The heart-mind plant thrives here, which suggests we could establish a connection anywhere." Her patterns shifted nervously. "I have actually been offered a position at the Interstellar Botanical Institute on Europa Station. It would put me within regular travel distance of both Earth and Celestia." Nico stared at her. "You've already thought that far ahead." "I've had 10 years to consider the possibilities," she reminded him. "But I understand this is all very sudden for you. The courtship period exists for a reason, to allow genuine feeling to emerge without pressure." As they parted that evening, Thalara hesitated at his door. "The harmony of purpose ritual approaches, it is more intimate than the previous ceremonies." "Intimate?" Nico echoed, his pulse quickening slightly. "It involves a deeper connection, a temporary melding of consciousness through the heart-mind plant. It is not undertaken lightly." Her patterns shifted in what he now recognized as vulnerability. "If you wish to end the courtship before then, it would be understood." Nico found himself reaching for her hand. "I'll be there," he said softly. After she left, Nico stood for a long time looking out at the stars, wondering how a chance encounter with a child a decade ago had led to this moment. Standing on the precipice of a connection he never could have imagined, with a woman who had crossed the galaxy to find him.